Welcome back. We're just hanging out at our beer pilgrimage at the Backview Brewery. We're going to check back in with Bobby, our brewmaster, and he's going to give us a tour of the brewery.
We can't make any kind of beer on brew day without grain. So typically most of our grain is barley. Every now and then we might use some wheat, some rye, some oats, something like that. But mostly it's a barley-based product. We don't use a lot of adjuncts. With Blue Testament we do use milled corn to bring out that flavor. But when you get grain, it's not pre-milled. You can buy it that way, but typically the better way is to buy grain that's not milled. And grain is in the shape of a small teardrop. The outside part of that is the husk, and the inside part is the endosperm. That's where all the starches are. What we basically do as brewers is we take that starch that's in that endosperm, we turn it into sugar, and then we give that to the yeast to eat. Yeast pee ethanol and they fart CO2. That's what they do. That's a very high level view of our product. And we can't go anywhere without the mill. So the mill takes that, it takes the husk off basically, and then it'll crush that middle part, and so that way we can filter it out later. So this is where it all starts. So we mill it into this big plastic thing behind me, that's what we call a grist case. Then we're ready for brew day. That we send over to the brew house where we'll go next. Behind me is our brewing system. This is what on a brew day I do. And so as a brewer, what we do is we take all that barley, whether it be corn, wheat, rye, whatever, and that's what we turn into the yeast food. When we make whatever we make on the brewing system, is called wort. It's not beer until the yeast start fermenting it. And so behind me there's 4 different vessels there. The first vessel is where all the grain goes into. That's what we call a mash mixer. We add the water, we add the grain, and that's where we turn all those starches into sugar. That's where, basically think of a big chemical reactor. Really it's, you know, it is reacting chemicals, but it's a little different. Once we're done there, we go to the second vessel, and that's that big vessel behind me with all the bolts on it. I don't know if you can quite see it. That's the second vessel. It's called a lauter tun. What we do there is when you mill it, you have to be very careful that you don't just completely destroy the barley. If you do, you can't filter all of the nasty stuff out. You don't want to send plant material to the boil kettle. You'll get tannin extraction and it tastes very nasty. So we can't do that. It'll be very bitter beer, and nobody likes bitter beer. So that's what the lauter tun is very important about. What we do is we call it vorloffing, so we come out the bottom and back over the top until that filter forms, all made out of the grain. Once it forms, we go to the boil kettle. The boil kettle does just that. We boil the beer there. That's where we add our hops and do all of those things that we do in that kettle. So it's kind of a big chemical reactor as well. The fourth vessel is important because after you add all those hops in, you don't want to give them to the yeast. The yeast really don't like hops. It is a preserving agent. So we go into the whirlpool at a tangential inlet. We make a big, it's just like if you were in your sink and you shook it up really fast with your hand, all that stuff comes to the middle, right? Same idea. All those hops we used to add in the boil kettle, we're going into the whirlpool at a tangential inlet, makes that big swirl, all that stuff comes up into what's called a hop cone. We then take that liquid off, leaving all that hops and nastiness behind, go through a heat exchanger, chill it down, pitch the yeast, and then the yeast begin to eat the sugars, make the alcohol, and that's when we have beer. So, like I said, then once these big cylindrical conical fermenters, that's where you can hear them. Well, I don't know if you can hear them, but they're bubbling back there. I mean, that's where the yeast turn into beer. Once we process it, we have a very cool piece of instrumentation here. It's called a centrifuge, and it's a separator. So what it does is it separates large molecules, typically your haze-forming proteins and things like that. We pull that out of the beer, get nice clear beer, and we take it over to the bright tank. The bright tank is where we carbonate it, get it ready for packaging, and we either keg it or can it. And that's the last step in it. So every part of the process is important.